Everyone knows that in its golden age, the Mafia enjoyed connections to corrupt political figures. But I'm amazed by how it was in Kansas City during the 1930s and 40s.
They weren't just ties. The mob was a critical part of the Democrat machine in that area.
And their ties back then went almost all the way up to President Harry Truman. In 1946, the congressman for that area was a Democrat named Roger Slaughter. And despite being in the same party as President Truman, the man often opposed him. In August of that year, Truman supported challenger Enos Axtell in the party's primary election for that seat, and Axtell ended up winning. But in Kansas City, where Truman began his political career many years earlier, the margin of victory for Axtell was so wide that it drew suspicion of possible voter fraud, particularly in the First Ward. A grand jury in Jackson County, Missouri, issued 70 indictments against Democratic Party workers. The paper ballots and poll books were seized as evidence and placed in a vault at the Jackson County Courthouse for safekeeping. On the night of May 27, 1947, unknown persons broke into the courthouse, where they then used explosives to get into the vault, and all the evidence of voter fraud was stolen. To this day, it has never been recovered.
And despite an intensive FBI investigation, the perpetrators were never found.
The closest lead came from a woman named Mary Bono, who claimed to know who one of the burglars was, but she refused to talk unless a deal could be made to have her husband released from prison in exchange for the information. Before an agreement could be finalized, she was shot to death when someone blasted her at point-blank range with a shotgun on 9th Street. The murder was never solved. But although the investigators could never prove it in court, all leads seemed to point back to one man, Charles Binaggio. Binaggio had been consolidating the remnants of the old Democratic Party machine that existed in Kansas City during the 1930s, and in addition to being a kingmaker through backroom politics, he is also believed to have been the boss of the Kansas City Mafia.
Let's take a look at how the Mafia took over a Midwest city, and how they were almost able to capture the state government.
Kansas City, Missouri has always been a medium-sized city in the Midwest heartland of America. Like other American cities, it attracted Italian immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries who settled together in enclaves, turning their neighborhoods into Little Italies. That happened in the city's First Ward. In the early decades of the 20th century, Cosa Nostra as we know it did not exist. Instead, there were many Black Hand gangs where Italian criminals preyed on Italian residents. But in the 1910s, Joseph Di Giovanni, a Sicilian immigrant in his 20s, began to dominate the other groups and consolidated his control. By the time Prohibition arrived, the Italian criminals of Kansas City were united under one organization. Details are murky from this mafia family's first decades because no one really knew they existed as an organization, and they didn't keep records. Modern historians are sure that Di Giovanni was definitely the head of his family during the Roaring Twenties, when bootlegging was the group's largest revenue source. Charlie Binaggio was 13 years younger than Joe Di Giovanni, and he was born in Texas in 1909. His family moved to Kansas City when he was a child, and he grew up in the First Ward. He was working for the Mafia family by the late 1920s. His first arrest was with Anthony Gizzo and Tony Casciola when the group was arrested in Denver with a stash of guns.
Both of these guys were part of the Kansas City crime family.
The rumor is they were sent by their bosses to assist some mobsters in Denver with a dispute. Another major figure in the Kansas City family was John Latzia. According to his World War I draft card, he was born in New York in 1896 and later moved to Kansas City. In addition to being a mobster, he also became close with Democratic Party machine boss Tom Pendergast. Pendergast was only briefly elected to office once as an alderman, but in the 1930s, he was the most powerful man in Kansas City. He was chairman of the Jackson County Democratic Party. Anyone looking to run for office under the party needed his blessing. And since the politicians in town were mostly Democrats, they needed to yield to the man's wishes. Independence would not be tolerated, and civil servants, cops, plus everyone else working in the public sector was also subservient to him. The man was the ruler of his own tiny kingdom, but that didn't mean that his power was absolute. It came from the Democratic Party winning elections, and to do that, he needed to have voters. And that's where the marriage between the politicians, which means the local government, and the Kansas City Mafia was born. John Laizia was the family's contact to Pendergast. The arrangement was simple. The mob was based in the First Ward, and they would get the people there to vote for Democrats. In exchange, their speakeasies and warehouses would be immune from police raids. And since the majority of American citizens in town wanted their alcohol, despite it being illegal at the time, this relationship made everyone happy.
But by the mid-1930s, the winds of change were coming.
Prohibition was set to end in December of 1933, which meant that new sources of revenue were needed. The speakeasies could be turned into legal nightclubs, but without liquor and beer being only available on the black market, the profit margin would be reduced. The family branched out into gambling rackets and also started distributing narcotics. But events in 1933 would put the organization in a spot where they needed to choose between what was profitable and what was socially acceptable. If they went too far outside of what the public would tolerate, then they would lose their political connections. By this time, many believed John Laizia to now be the boss, with Joe DiGiovanni having retired and stepped back from day-to-day operations. This mode of thinking might be outdated, and it could be more likely that Laizia was the front boss, while the 45-year-old DiGiovanni continued to rule while staying in the shadows. Either way, the organization found itself under scrutiny in 1933 because of an event called the Kansas City Massacre. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, there was a huge national crime wave, with banks across America being robbed. The FBI had captured the notorious criminal Frank Nash and were transporting him through Kansas City on the railroad for trial. Another criminal named Vernon Miller organized a gang to ambush the federal agents at Union Station to take Nash back. Apparently, Laizia sent one of his men, Adam Ricchetti, to be part of the gang, and he may have also supplied them all with weapons. It was a disaster. 4 law enforcement officers were killed, along with Frank Nash.
The responding crackdown was unprecedented, with federal agents going all over the city to follow up every single lead so they can get anyone who was remotely connected to the shootout.
This not only disrupted the illegal mob business, but it created a politically unpalatable spot for Tom Pendergast, as the public wanted all criminals brought to justice. This meant that John Laizia was too much of a liability to do business with. The next year, on July 10, 1934, he was killed as he exited a car driven by his bodyguard, Charlie Carollo. Carollo became either the next boss or front boss, depending on how influential Joe DiGiovanni was in the family's management. He enjoyed a very corrupt relationship with police chief Otto Higgins. Meanwhile, Charles Binaggio also became more involved with the family's relations with the Pendergast political machine.
When it came to Election Day in Kansas City, a reporter wrote that cars were demolished,
women beaten, trucks burned, ballot boxes stuffed, and in the city election of March 27, 1934, 4 men were killed. Another account of the time noted that, on Election Day, pimps, whores, crooks, derelicts, and other nonconformists were given lists of names and hurried from precinct to precinct casting ballots, receiving 25 cents per vote. During the 1936 election, in one ward, a Pendergast candidate received 19,201 votes, while his opponent received just 13. While Pendergast might have been the ruler of Kansas City, he was despised nationally by other Democrats as being corrupt. In 1939, he was convicted of tax evasion. Carollo and Police Chief Higgins were also caught up in the investigation and also went to prison. What was even worse for the Kansas City Mafia was that due to the rampant police corruption, The department was now put directly under the state's control, which made it harder for them to continue their illegal activities without being bothered. Now the Pendergast machine was broken, but a lot of its parts were still there, waiting for someone to put them back together again. Charles Binaggio thought he was that someone.
Before we continue with this story, I just want to remind everyone that my latest book, Our Thing, is available for purchase on Amazon and other major retailers. The link is in the description below, so please check it out.
In 1931, Lucky Luciano became the ultimate winner of the Castellamarese War, and he organized the Commission. This organized the Mafia at a national level, and while Kansas City was its own independent family, it only had about 36 members. Chicago was an 8-hour drive away, and an unequal partnership formed between the two groups. Kansas City could still be run independently, but the Chicago outfit would have a lot of soft power influence over it. During the 1930s, the Kansas City family enjoyed a cushy relationship with the local government, where they supplied votes in exchange for political protection. But with Tom Pendergast's fall from power, things would never be the same. Though no one at the time was able to predict the future, Charles Binaggio thought he had a chance to not only repair the old machine, but he also believed that he could make it bigger. So Binaggio made his first move in the early 1940s when he opened the First Ward Democratic Club, as that was the family's base of power.
Then he slowly expanded his influence into the neighboring wards on the north side to absorb them. But the only problem was, he wasn't the only one trying to resurrect the old Pendergast machine.
Jim Pendergast, Tom's nephew, was doing the same thing. Ultimately, the two men could not agree to get along, and they became rivals. Binaggio's first goal as a political kingmaker was to get his candidate elected to the governor's mansion. In the 1944 primary, the Binaggio faction of the Democratic Party faced off against the new Pendergast faction. Jim Pendergast's candidate won. They did team up together in the 1946 primary, where Enos Axtell won.
But this was less about friendship and more about trying to please the most powerful man in the National Democrat Party, President Harry S. Truman.
Truman had come up through the Pendergast machine when he won his first election in the 1920s as a county judge. In 1934, he won the primary to become the Democratic Senate candidate with the backing of the Pendergast machine. And in November, he won the general election, putting him on the path to become Roosevelt's vice president in 1944. This history would come back to haunt him later, as opposition politicians called him the president from Pendergast instead of the president from Missouri. Truman liked to brand himself as an honest guy, and there has not been any evidence of corruption on his part. In regards to his relationship with Pendergast, he described it as, "Any man would have been very foolish to turn down the support of the organization, which at the time controlled 100,000 votes, and I acted just as every other candidate would have done." The theft and disappearance of the ballots in 1946 that showed evidence of voter fraud must have really inflated Binaggio's ego about being a mover and shaker in politics.
He was becoming pretty well known among the locals in his city for his political muscle and for his criminal ties.
No one knew back then that he was Cosa Nostra because no one outside of it knew what it was, but everyone knew he was a gangster. With the 1948 election now on the horizon, Binaggio decided to back Forrest Smith to be the next governor. If he could control the most powerful man in the state, then he would be the one really in charge.
And he wasn't satisfied with expanding the old Kansas City model of the government turning a blind eye to illegal activities.
The fall of Pendergast taught everyone that politicians come and go. If they really wanted to have a lasting thing, then they needed to have the actual laws changed. Binaggio wanted to have gambling legalized in Missouri. The Mafia already enjoyed legalized gambling in Cuba and owned hotels with casinos that made massive amounts of money from American tourists. If they could set up something like that in an already populated area, then the revenues would be even bigger. This was an idea to create a statewide Las Vegas before anyone had a concept of what that city would one day become. Having most likely secured Joe DiGiovanni's blessing, Binaggio pitched the idea to the Chicago outfit's leaders, and then it went to the commission in New York for approval. Binaggio promised that if Smith got elected, then this would happen. But to get him into office, he needed a lot of money to run a statewide campaign. Some sources say that he received $200,000, while others estimate it was $2 million. When adjusted for inflation, $200,000 then is worth $2.7 million now. Binaggio's candidate won the 1948 election. Harry Truman also won his election that year as well.
Binaggio had plans to go to Washington to celebrate, but he was given a message that the president didn't want him around.
It was a blow to his ego, but he had work to do in Missouri anyway, so that his mob higher-ups could get a return on their investment. In addition to Kansas City's police being under state control, St. Louis was in the same boat for the same corruption reasons. They were each controlled by a board of police commissioners, with each seat appointed by the governor, and since he was instrumental in getting the governor elected, he assumed that only candidates he proposed and approved of would get those seats. If he controlled the board, then the mob would control the police. The only problem for Charles Binaggio was that he did not control Forrest Smith like he thought he would. Smith knew that if he continued to be in Binaggio's debt, then he would never get out from under it, and so he double-crossed the man. He did not approve of all of Binaggio's candidates, and Binaggio was never able to get control of the majority of either board. Without control of the police, the plans for gambling expansion in the state could not proceed, and without this step, the proposal for legalized gambling would never materialize. The commission and the Chicago bosses were angry. Binaggio sold them empty promises, and he was warned that he better fix it. He tried to bribe commissioners that were not in his pocket, but they would not give in to him. Certain people were losing patience with Binaggio. On the night of April 6, 1950, Charles Binaggio and his reputed underboss, Charles Gargata, went to the First Ward Democratic Club to have an after-hours meeting. The next morning, a cab driver going to a nearby cafe noticed that the front door for the Democratic Club was open, and he heard running water inside. He went over to take a look and saw the now dead Gargata laying on the floor. He had been shot. When the police came to investigate, they found Charles Binaggio sitting at his desk with 4 bullets in his head. It looked like the two Charlies were having a meeting with someone or a group of people that they thought were friends. When Binaggio was killed, Gargata panicked and tried to run away, but he was shot before he could get to the door. As for the running water, it came from a broken toilet and was unrelated to the hit. Over 1,200 people attended Binaggio's funeral, and another 10,000 watched the funeral procession to the cemetery. Binaggio died right before the Kefauver hearings on organized crime began. This was the first time that the public began to learn that crime across America was organized into a network.
The murder remains unsolved, but it seems obvious to many investigators that the motive stems from his failure to bring Forrest Smith under the Mafia's control.
Whether the killers came from out of town or were part of the Kansas City organization remains a mystery. Anthony Gizzo, one of the mobsters that Binaggio was arrested with in Denver back in 1930, is believed to have become the next boss.
Under him, changes were made that had the organization returning to being back in the shadows.
He died from a heart attack in 1953, and Nicholas Savella became the next boss. Savella ruled the Kansas City underworld for 3 decades and was also instrumental in the development of Las Vegas. He kept a low profile and also instituted a practice of abandoning rackets that the public strongly disapproved of. Under him, the family left the narcotics business as it was seen as unpopular. Anthony Gizzo's son was also an addict, and this could have provided a moral incentive for the family to divest from that trade.
Savella would ultimately be brought down by the federal government's investigation in the Vegas and the casino skimming operation. After that, the family was severely damaged.
But they managed to survive and still exist today.
They might be a lot smaller and less powerful than their glory days, or they might just be really good at staying in the shadows.
Charles Binaggio is one of the most interesting and obscure mobsters that I have come across.
Originally, I was planning to make a movie about the casino skimming operation that was featured in the movie Casino, but when I started researching the KC family, I realized that, Boss Binaggio with his political aspirations was a really interesting story that I wanted to explore, so the topic ended up changing.
Binaggio and Savella both came from the same generation, and each of them were born in America with parents that immigrated from Italy. But while Binaggio had high ambitions that bordered on delusional and tried to realize them,
Nicholas Savella knew who he and the family were in relation to American society, and he decided to stay in his lane.
While Binaggio was murdered in cold blood and the police didn't seem eager to solve his killing, Savella died of natural causes from lung cancer, though he did spend the last few years of his life in prison.